There we go. Hello. Hello and welcome to Design Career Network's Get That UX Job. We publish design career advice featuring top designers in technology on our YouTube channel every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. I'm your host, Andy Galpern, and while I'm a practicing growth designer, I'll be moderating this discussion today, leaving it up to Lex Roman and Molly Norris Walker to guide you with their expertise. And today we're going to talk about growth design and what it's like to have a growth design career. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and hit the little bell to get notifications. Also, we do have free content every week on Thursday, live and on demand. We'll be offering interview advice, portfolio feedback, resumes, and where to steer your UX career from influential designers in technology. Now, let's go ahead and bring on Lex and Molly. Hello. And let me turn on their microphones. Okay, wait, unmute mic. And comments. Hello. We can see your comments. So just to let everybody know, real quickly of our schedule today, we're going to kick off this event by answering some questions about growth design. And then we'll play a game about A/B testing. And then Lex and Molly will answer more questions about growth design based on what the audience wants to learn about. We're here to answer your questions and also guide you toward a fulfilling, wonderful career in UX and technology. So, oh, look, good vibes. Yes, good vibes.
Good vibes back.
Welcome, Jean, Radana, Maureen. Hello, everybody. Okay, so let's start with a little introduction. So, Lex, say hi, please.
Hi.
Hi.
So nice to be here. Hi.
Wonderful. Okay, Lex Roman leads the industry as a digital product designer for growth. She also organizes. Whoa, that was not good. She also organizes communities for growth designers and gives presentations. My microphone fell on me.
Yeah,
Let me do that again.
A little earthquake in NorCal.
Oh gosh. Way to start the event.
That was my fault.
Blame it on my AV tech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That in-home AV, you can't get that quality that you used to get.
Do you want to mute it?
It's okay.
Okay.
You can hear the little swirling. We're just tidying up the microphone. Anyway, Lex leads the industry as a digital product designer for growth. She organizes communities for growth designers and gives talks. Lex gave a talk at my growth design series about a couple of years ago about leading growth design, and we have all that on YouTube. We can add it in the show notes for to link you to it. And then Molly, say hello, please.
Howdy.
Molly Norris Walker. She's the head of growth design and user research at Influx Data, and she's also the author of Design Driven Growth. She's very strong in B2B and has a lot of perspective on hiring designers. And Lex and Molly recently launched Growth Design Fellows to offer a professional development space where designers can improve their skills and learn how to work better on growth teams. So visit growthdesigners.co for more information that will also be included in the show notes. So let's kick off this whole session by answering some questions about growth design. And we'll start with Lex. Lex, tell us, what is growth design?
Growth design is the practice of having an impact on the business through solving for authentic user problems.
Molly, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, a working definition I always use is to contrast it to like traditional UX or product design and say it's about connecting more people to the value in the product rather than building the value of the core product, to contrast it with product design. So instead of doing kind of user journeys, you're doing more of interventions. Instead of designing to hopefully release and learn, you're really designing to optimize a lot of usually existing surface area rather than necessarily like innovating a ton in core features.
Great. Okay. And how does growth design affect the business?
You're focused on high. Ideally a lot. You're focused on high impact parts of the business. That's what really differentiates.
Yeah, it's really gotten popular in sort of SaaS products where the mandate is to have the product grow its own user base. I think we're in a huge transition, and we have been for years, but it's been super accelerated with COVID and increased just digitization of everything. And as work and products move more online, there's more of a mandate for products to grow their own user base. And instead of relying on sort of market and sales driven growth, we're relying more on product-led growth. And in a product-led growth environment, in software as a service, growth design is really the act of looking at your product and saying, how is this going to sustain itself by growing its own user base, as opposed to expecting someone to just like dump a bunch of people at the top of your funnel and them to complete jobs or tasks once they're in the product. So it's really a shift to thinking about how can everything that we do in a product, how can we layer it on so it's sustainable and can create its own set of users that can keep that product viable.
That's great. Okay, and growth design is a lot. You do a lot of A/B testing and experimentation. Can you tell me a little bit about what experimentation is and how it works? Molly.
Oh, yeah.
I'll let Molly take it.
I think when growth design started, A/B testing was sort of like the de facto activity. If you were growth designing, you were designing A/B tests. I think that has shifted a little bit. But there was a landmark, it was at the Harvard Business Review. They had a cover story that said the surprising power of design experimentation and talked about how companies were A/B testing at scale and seeing these like small 1% increases that would compound over, 4 quarters and deliver like massive business value. And that sort of created this unbelievable increase in interest in businesses to be A/B testing, because like shipping code is super expensive. And a lot of people were shipping code and then moving on to the next feature. We all know that we should build, measure, learn. But the reality is that teams are really just kind of chomping through big roadmaps. And there wasn't really a team, especially a team that included designers, whose job it was to like look at things that have shipped and squeeze more value out of them. So growth design and growth experimentation, really kind of, I think, started in that A/B optimization space. But now I think growth designers a lot of times are focusing on interventions that are not necessarily like need to be A/B tested. Like, they're high business value, you kind of know what needs to be done and you just do it. So I think of growth design of having like 2 tracks. And one of those tracks is that optimization. And another track is more just like discovering sort of product gaps where you can just immediately squeeze more business value by like designing a better checkout or designing a better onboarding experience. So that A/B testing is really kind of the foundation and the origins. But I think now we're also working on like higher value like design interventions too. I don't know. That's my sort of like origin story. What do you think, Lex?
Yeah, I mean, I came up in design through Lean Startup. So my early projects were all around like, how do we help companies find product market fit? And in those environments, you can't use A/B testing because you don't have that volume. So you end up using a lot of sort of creative ways to de-risk, things like feature faking or, prototype testing, Wizard of Oz style stuff, landing page tests, which we'll show maybe a little bit later. And I've brought all that with me into my growth practice. So A/B testing is a core part of my growth design practice, but I think of it as just like a field of de-risking, right? Like, what's the lightest weight way I can de-risk what we're planning to do here or what we think is going to drive value? And it's not always an A/B test. Sometimes it can be something a little bit more creative than that, or like Molly said, more on the innovation side.
I think of it as like small tests and big bets. So I do as many small tests kind of continuously as I can. But you still have to place big bets. And there's some things you just can't validate, especially when it comes to kind of marrying data, especially user data and data that you need for personalization. It's kind of hard to test that unless you've made a big investment and put that into production and created the infrastructure to like personalize at scale. So a lot of the big things that really move the needle that, go from that exponential growth line, that linear growth line to that exponential growth line are going to be those big bets. And all A/B testing really achieves is linear growth, which is really effing important, not to demean that at all. But I think growth designers are also thinking about what are those big bets that are going to make those kind of exponential leaps. So I think design experimentation is kind of one piece of growth design, but we're getting more confident about making like big, usually data-driven bets in user experience.
Nice. Okay. And also, to give everybody just a quick background, I actually worked on the growth team at Adobe as a contractor for a bit. And it's a lot different. From my understanding, I'm also working in growth right now, but more on like the lead generation marketing side. I kind of skirt the edges of like product and marketing. But is it like, what is the difference? Like, is there a big difference between working in a giant organization doing growth and also working in a smaller company, like maybe a startup? What is the difference between the two? Lex.
So many things. Larger companies move slower. That's true of no matter what you're doing at a larger company, right? There's more layers, there's more meetings, there's more approvals. At the same time, larger companies have more infrastructure. So you usually have more tooling set up. You might have an in-house data team or an in-house experimentation platform team. And so you have a lot more support as well, which you saw, I think, probably, Andy, at Adobe. At a smaller company, you're able to move faster, but you have to build a lot of that yourself or, use vendors and try to get them to work for your use case. And so I tend to work at smaller companies, which means that my team is not only running experiments and driving growth, but building all that growth infrastructure ourselves.
But there was something also that you mentioned when we talked about this yesterday, which was about budget. Now, how does the budget influence the growth team or the project that you're working on?
Oh yeah, Molly, you should talk about this. This is just about like the runway a growth team has.
Yeah, I mean, and what the mandate to deliver is. So I think that, when you're working in a SaaS or a startup that is primarily, their costs are people and technology, then you have to say, okay, if this is like this year, we're trying to get to 1 million and the next year we're trying to get to 10 million, in terms of a piece of that would used to be spent on like kind of marketing spend or sales spend. And now we're talking more about, I think you still need marketing and sales, but you're also talking about what your growth budget is. And so I think there are sort of 3 inputs into kind of any revenue goal that you want if you live in a universe of like very controlled kind of people and materials cost, right? It's different if you're working in the real world and you have actual operational costs, but in a kind of pure setting like a SaaS, then all we're saying, the budget that you get is just you're part of that sort of input into a revenue growth, kind of whatever the kind of calculation that you have there, whatever your formula, whatever your model for growth says, is that now we're talking about inputs into just a really traditional product team in some ways, like designers, data analysts, product managers, engineers. And I think one difference I see with sort of growth teams is the composition of like PM and designer tends to be a lot higher than engineering because you are ideally not shipping as much production code. Ideally, you're doing kind of lower weight engineering lifts. So those kind of product teams that are focused on growth tend to have like more designers and PMs than necessarily the traditional ratios of like a product design team. So in terms of like headcount cost, that's where in a SaaS, that's where like predominantly the budget goes. There are infrastructure costs, but those are talking like tens of thousands. We're not talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars to do the type of tooling that Lex was talking about.
I do have a question to follow up with that. Now, as far as a growth team goes, do you need an like an in-house team to work on growth all the time, or can they just like be contractors, or can they work temporarily, maybe do a little bit of growth and then and then let the company take over? What is the usual structure for, like, let's say like a startup that has a decent amount of funding but wants to grow their product?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, growth would be like after you have product market fit, you look at building a growth team to then drive sort of more than your early adopters. So you feel like, great, we have these fervent early adopters. Now we really want to make a sizable investment in connecting more people to the value in the product. And that's where, someone might look at starting a growth team. Usually growth teams, I mean, Lex starts them up for companies all the time. So I'd be interested to know what she thinks. Usually it starts just with two, like a PM designer or a designer and engineer. That's usually the starting formula. I think it's hard for contractors to contribute in this role, because usually getting the data and the infrastructure in place to do growth design is sort of the 80% of it, and then the 20% of it is the fun stuff. So contractors generally have trouble kind of sticking through those types of cycles to get infrastructure set up. Sometimes they can be successful in that, but that can be a really long runway to get to the point where you can actually practice growth design. But I don't know, what do you think, Lex? You boot these up all the time.
Yeah, and Andy and I were talking about this a little bit, and maybe we'll dive more into like growth readiness, because I think that that's an important thing, whether you're joining a company or contracting with a company, to be aware of. So I have been a growth design consultant for most of the time I've been practicing growth design. I've done it in-house and as a consultant. I agree that growth needs an internal owner for the reasons that Molly said, but I also think that there's a couple reasons why consulting can be valuable. One is that it's really hard to hire experienced growth practitioners. There just aren't enough out there. So if your company wants to bring growth in-house, it's hard to hire that expertise. It's easier for you to hire product teams who want to be growth teams and to bring in consultants to empower them and work alongside them, which is a lot of what I do now. I coach teams and support teams as they're building those capabilities. And then I help them transition that, and they keep that in-house. In order to take on those engagements, I always make sure that they do have the infrastructure and sort of the growth ready checklist, which we'll talk about. And I also think that when you take on a consulting engagement, like when you enlist a group of consultants, you want them to really execute for you. So you don't like bog them down in like design reviews and like team culture stuff. And so the consulting team in some ways can be much more focused than your internal team, which can get, in a lot of companies, just really like bogged down in meetings.
That's pretty common for, I feel like whether you're a consultant or there's a fine balance between, being a consultant and wanting to be involved with like the rest of the company culture and being tuned into everything that's going on, and also like setting boundaries and making sure that you're staying focused on your actual projects and knowing like your time might be limited. But I will say, okay, actually, I will say that it is time for us to play a little game. Let's play the A/B test challenge. And Lex, please share your screen to get that game started. Let's go right now.
All right, we're ready.
Yes. Engagement is up. Yes.
So we have a couple A/B tests. It's easy to talk about growth design, but we have some A/B tests that we think give examples of types of small projects that we've worked on. And I think we have 5 or 6 of these. Some of them are from my work history. Some of them are from Lex's. And while we said we also do kind of bigger interventions, we wanted to sort of use these as elements that show different parts of a growth design kind of day to day. So this first example is a question, which is, which call to action button had a higher conversion rate for e-commerce website ads? So these were actually ads that were going into search. And one of the bread and butter elements of kind of UI design is the call to action buttons. And I was sort of thinking about what you can optimize in them. And a lot of people focus on the text. This is sort of like the most basic, most elementary type of A/B test, is just switching the text. So in A, you have the word sign up, and then B, you have learn more. I mean, we've all clicked on these hundreds, if not thousands of times. But there are other parts of this that you can optimize, like color, even like radius, spacing, text size, text treatment. And so this is something that I always do as almost like a warm up when I'm working with a new growth designer, is to have them do a bunch of A/B tests. So let's see. Lex, what are your, and Andy, what do your instincts say here? Which is a more reliable converter, A or B?
This was one of the few ones that I actually guessed, so I don't want to say because I actually know the answer.
I know the answer too, but I guess I would say that my instinct would be A, because I feel like it's so action oriented and I always go for action. So that's my pick, A.
Okay. And I'll say why I chose B, and that's because learn more sounds more gentle, and it doesn't sound like, okay, I have to go buy something. I just want to understand more about it before I buy it, so it doesn't feel as forceful. So I have a feeling that B, even though, like, I don't know, there's this whole thing about learn more, like that's a generic call to action, but in some ways the generic call to actions seem to work okay. So tell us, Molly.
Sure.
The
So B won by quite a bit, percent. Here it said 24%. So 24% is also a huge margin. Like usually you're seeing like 1 to 3% for a variant to win. So B is actually a big winner. And I think the next slide says on what dimensions. So every A/B test usually has like a primary and a secondary objective. So this primary objective here that I asked about was the conversion rate. So you can see that the conversion rate for sign up was 15 versus learn more, which was 40. And then the secondary objective was that click-through rate. So just like clicking on the button. And you can see that was 1.65 for sign up to 2.3 for learn more. So it kind of won on the primary and secondary objective. You see sign up everywhere. It's sort of like the donate button for startups. Like you see it everywhere. But one of the things that has kind of been validated again and again is that you want to kind of lower the kind of the ask, right? Like it's like someone is sort of going by you at 80 miles an hour and you shouldn't be yelling buy now. You should be like, look at this. So it's sort of just a little bit less cognitive load. And also it's just you're asking less of the user to learn more rather than sign up. Like idea that they'll be ready enough to sign up at that exact moment is less likely. You have a bigger pool of people who are willing to learn more. So kind of, I used to think of it as like higher business value, kind of lower friction for the user is a great kind of area to explore, using language that has higher business value to sign up, but is lower user ask, which is learn more. So those can be good areas to brainstorm variants on whether it's like higher business value for you or kind of easier to do for the user.
Well, easier to do probably would bring higher business value, right?
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends. I think there's a couple things. One thing is that the recipe that works for one business may not work for another. So that's one reason how Molly and I stay employed, right? Is like there's still like we can't just copy and paste from every business to the next. Mm-hmm. And then the other is it's totally possible to make things great for users in a way that doesn't drive your business.
It's an awesome quote, by the way. The recipe that works for what. Okay, so let's move on. By the way, we have it's funny, somebody's A/B is too generic. What am I learning? Learn more about what? That's why you're clicking, right? No.
Theoretically, there was some supporting copy here. We didn't show it, but
yeah. Okay. Let's move on
one?
to number 2. This is fun. We're having fun.
So this one's pretty old. You can tell by
I'll zoom in.
You can tell by the design trends here, but so this is a work with a charity or a nonprofit called Partners in Health. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but they're really famous for their public health work, especially in Haiti. They've built some amazing hospitals, but all over the world. And we engaged with them when I was working at a design agency, and we were doing some A/B testing around their main donation page. So the question here is, all things being held equal between A and B, which picture will drive more donations? Would it be a picture of A, the founder? That's Dr. Paul Farmer, the founder of Partners in Health, or B, a picture of a beneficiary? So that's a picture of a child receiving an oral vaccine. It's very close up. It's very intimate. So which one do you guys think drove more donations?
Vote now.
What do you think, Andy? What do you think, Lex?
Well, I thought B, because I thought that the person who was actually affected by the vaccine, like the person actually receiving it, that would cause more emotions to be like spurred up. But Lex, what do you think?
I agree, because they always say in marketing to drive pain, right? Like you see those billboards that are like, look at these sad children that are dying. And that's been a pretty effective marketing. So I'm on B too.
Look at the rich CEO who is gaining money. No, I'm just kidding.
So
Sorry.
Yeah, let's go to
Should
the
I go
results
forward?
here. Yeah, go for it. I know people are still deciding for themselves here.
B. We sound like we're playing music now. Recording a verse. Anyway, go.
Yeah, so A won by 10%. Again, a actually pretty high number, normal. So another big win. Yeah, Dr. Paul Farmer is actually, you have to think about who the audience is for this. So who you're asking to donate is a supporter of your organization. And to us, a general audience, Dr. Paul Farmer means nothing. But to the type of people who support Partners in Health, Paul Farmer is like a very inspirational figure. He said, those who are given the least deserve the most. The hospitals he builds for, low income and emerging economies are built like to incredible architectural standard. And so he's a really inspiring person in the healthcare field. And donors are kind of hit with really kind of hard hitting, sometimes we call it poverty porn pictures. And so there's sort of a fatigue to that. And so for Partners in Health, a picture of Paul Farmer is more powerful than a picture of like a child receiving an oral vaccine. So another interesting thing about this test is that I think we stopped this test after only like 30 conversions because the margin was so high that we were able to really like declare a winner quite quickly. One of the number one like myths that people get with A/B testing is like, oh, I don't have a big enough audience to A/B test. But if we think about sort of like statistics, it's not so much the volume, it's really the margin. So if you have 20 people who engage with this donation page, but 19 of them go with option A, like that's statistically significant. So a lot of people think you need hundreds or thousands of people, but you really don't. And I don't remember the exact sort of sample size for this A/B test, but I remember it was like way less than 100 that we got really definitive results.
Yeah, although it is worth mentioning that most of the A/B tests you run will be inconclusive.
I have some inconclusive ones too, don't worry.
Yeah.
Well, I really like that that you brought up, Molly, like how much that the audience that you're creating the A/B test for matters. Like who is the person that you're talking to, and do they actually recognize the person in the photo? Do they respect them? And is it going to be like, is it going to create a different emotion versus like somebody that they don't know? So I love that. These are fun. Yeah, let's keep going. All right, number 3.
I think that's an important point though. Like I think sometimes people think of A/B tests as like, let's just throw a bunch of garbage at the wall and like see what sticks. And like that's not a good approach, right? You're still thinking strategically, you're still thinking through your design process. You're not just like throwing crap out there.
And taking extremes, right? Like these images are super extreme from each other. Like, and it's not 2 pictures of different beneficiaries. Like, oh, like this is really sad. But a lot of times with A/B testing, they'll just like look at demographics. So like, what kind of beneficiary should we show? Should we show like a Haitian child, or should we show like a Moldovan teenager or whatever? And it's like, actually, no, that's not enough of a dichotomy to really drive. Like, yeah, you might get results. They might be conclusive because, a powerful image, but really what you want to be testing is extremes, like, founder or a team. You could have a picture of healthcare workers, so you're trying to think of like really more extreme, but swapping images is just, it is really easy A/B testing. I think people forget to do it. You can change background images. That's another way that's like super easy to drive, small increases.
I love it. So swapping images, swapping text and buttons. And now we're talking about navigations.
Yeah, so this is Yuppie Chef. This is this actually I got, I think, from Optimizely or VWO. I can't remember. So this isn't actually from my own personal history. This is from I thought that was just like an interesting case study. But Yuppie Chef is an online retailer in South Africa. If anyone knows them, I didn't, but they have an online wedding registry. And the A test has their main navigation. So the navigation that you'd have in a store that just has like their different site sections. And then B is the exact same landing page for an online wedding registry, but it doesn't have that navigation. So will removing global navigation drive more conversions? So A or B?
Well, what are they trying to convert?
Yeah, is the conversion
to
click through
sign
on the
up
button?
for the registry. So there's that big CTA. So the conversion, the objective was to convert was to create a wedding registry, which would be you'd have to select items that you want for your wedding. You want people to buy for you.
Okay, so Kenny
You can
plus
ask
B.
more refining questions if you want.
Kenny says B. Redonna says B. Everybody's saying B. Put more focus
Yeah, I
on
feel
the
like
CTA.
I'm with them. B.
I actually think it might be A, and I'll say because A feels like, okay, well, the site is full. There's a lot of content on it. I can trust it. Maybe more people visit the site. So my instinct says A, although I feel like it might be cluttered with A as the option. But A versus B, who's gonna fight? Who's gonna fight? Who's gonna win? Ready, fight. Let's go.
Ray says they're going to coffee and tea. Me too.
Yeah.
I think B, because like in general, I found that if I put one
Mhm.
call to action on the page, people will click it because they have no choice.
They have nowhere else to go, or they can press X.
Yeah,
and
this is a
leave.
very busy website though.
Yeah, they have a lot going on here. Yeah, it's so you can go to the next one. I think the audience mostly had it. You ladies mostly had it.
No,
Andy,
I didn't have it at all.
Andy aside.
He's trying to go against her instincts because we've been failing the last couple.
Yes. Nice.
So
yeah. So actually, Julio says, or Julius, says go no navigation. So B, less to explore. Kenny says, so I'm going with B. Yeah, the audience has almost everybody has it except for a couple of you, but you're so smart. Don't worry.
You know what the funny?
Yeah.
So I ran a similar test like this when I was at the Black Tux because our checkout process had a navigation in it, and I found that people were leaving checkout to go places. So I ran a test to take out all the options, but what happened was people just clicked on the logo and went back home and then just took the extra steps anyway.
That's because when you go through I'm gonna let Molly talk, but I just want to add this. When you go through like Amazon checkout and they're like, okay, let's remove anything that's gonna get in the way except for maybe an upsell or two of you checking out. So like any kind of link that's gonna get in the way, let's keep you on this page. That's a good point, Lex.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think removing navigation. So one of the things I always do, I don't know if you do this, Lex, is whenever I show up at like a new startup, I'm always like, okay, we need what I call like a conversion page, which is a page that usually has the opposite color of the rest of the site. So I usually invert the color palette. So if the site like Amazon is light, then the checkout is dark. Or just making it a strong departure. So when I'm putting the user into like a squeeze moment, like a sign up flow or an onboarding checklist or checkout, it feels different. It's like a focus state. It's like a real context switch. And I give them all of the visual identity cues to get to that place. And then I also remove all navigation. So this is I would say almost a golden rule at this point to remove navigation for landing page, anything that I consider like a conversion page or a funnel page.
That's really good.
Unless your website is broken, like the Black Tux's was, in which case it didn't work because people were not done shopping and they were going to check out prematurely.
Is its own little monster for sure. So yeah.
Yeah.
We have time to do a couple more. Do you guys want us to do a couple more? Or ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Yes.
We can speed it up. We can speed it up a little bit.
Okay.
So this one, this is like kind of a complicated one. Oops. But yeah, so this is at my current startup. We're a data startup. So in order for you to use any of our products, you need to have data in. So we need you to load data. So what we found is it's really hard, like our aha moment, loading data is a really hard, like first mile obstacle. So what we did is we took our loading data page where you select like a data source, and we just added a module that said, need help loading data, speak with an expert. And then you could book into like talk with a customer success person. So will allowing users to talk to an expert when loading data increase activation? And activation means writing a single kilobyte of data.
I think
Any
so.
questions about this test? Because like what's the difference between A and B? Exactly the same. All B has is that little module on top that says talk to an expert.
When you speak with an expert, is it an instant expert or is it?
No, it's booking. It's like
okay,
a booking.
so you're basically okay. I think it depends on how much they want the product, and also, yeah. But I believe that if it's really complex to load the data, they need a redesign, right? I don't know.
Redesign, load data.
Redesign, yes.
Yeah. I would think that yes, B.
I'm on B too, and I think this is a great example of, hopefully, if B wins, how you can support a better user experience in a way that drives growth, right? Like driving growth through identifying a gap in the UX. I hope I'm right since I said that. Should we go forward?
You're always right in some way.
Yeah, go for the answer. Yeah. I actually don't 100% remember this. Oh yeah.
He had no
impact. Probably. Yeah. Okay, so the question is the impact too hard to measure because it's too long a journey between those two things?
Yeah,
clicking this button and
that's possible. I mean, it's kind of what you were saying, like there are a lot more inconclusive tests than there are conclusive tests. So, I mean, we saw people clicking on it, but we didn't see any like increase in activation. So it wasn't that it wasn't being utilized. It's just like maybe it was just the cycle times are too long to attribute. Like there's just stuff that's hard to A/B test. So, and generally, it's kind of like the burden of proof. If a variant isn't really successful, then you're not going to put it in production code. So yeah, it was like a little better, but it wasn't enough for us to take the effort to like then move this thing into production. So we just went back to A.
It makes sense.
Yeah. For me, if the test is positive for users and has no impact, I'll move it into production usually, unless it's like a huge lift to do that. But having to speak to an expert, that's like a whole person's time. So.
Well, it's not even just that. It's like speak with an expert and then go through a booking process versus like having instant help that will guide you like on demand. It's totally different. So I'm too lazy to even talk to conversational AI. Sometimes I get that makes sense. Well, just give them more information, so it makes it easier.
I think we have 2 more.
I'm gonna skip through this one though, actually, and go to this one.
I like
which is the homepage test. I feel like we covered like buttons and images.
Yeah.
Definitely images and buttons are super fun to A/B test. This is not really an A/B test. This is the culmination of a big bet in user flow. But I thought this was a cool one to show. So this is a company called Prosper. This was one of my first growth design projects back in 2015, where they wanted to optimize the mobile process for applying for a loan. So they had really much lower conversion on mobile devices to apply for a loan than on desktop devices. So we really focused on mobile conversion. So what you're looking at here is a glimpse of the interaction pattern. The first screen is their existing pattern, which was like a few questions per screen. The middle pattern is 1 question per screen. And the pattern on the right is a long scrolling page. So this is like kind of like for the design of this loan application. And keep in mind, a loan application is like 20 questions long. Which one of these patterns ended up winning at the end of the project?
That's a good question.
And the win is complete loan applications?
Yes, the win is complete the loan application.
It's between A and B.
Yeah, I would go B, probably, but there's a lot more opportunity to drop off too, and like get lost in it because there's so many questions. So I would lean B just because, with mobile devices, like being so like dealing with so many different screen sizes, resolutions, connectivity, like context, like in a living room with like your family. I feel like B again is just focuses the user, but I could also see where C could be effective because it's really driven by you, but I don't know. Yeah.
Well, C doesn't feel like it's divided enough. Like in the sections, it feels like a little bit, like I feel like but B needs a breadcrumb on top that tells you that you're step 1 out of 20, you're 2 out of 20, you're almost there. Save your progress, come back. Hey,
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
It's hard
That-
to do on
yeah.
mobile though. So,
Yeah.
space wise.
It's
But-
tough. All right, let's see if I put the answer in here.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
20
Okay.
to 30% lift for one question at a time.
Woohoo!
Yeah. And this is similar. I don't know if this is a golden rule, Molly, but for me too, I've seen breaking it up really be successful. I did this at Black Tux with their checkout process. We broke that into steps too. And that's always been a winning pattern for me too.
I see that with tax. I was thinking of tax apps, like pretty complicated. I think any process that's like that is complicated, like they tend to isolate you on one at a time. Like a Rocket Mortgage app is one at a time. Yeah.
Just to break to make it easier. Okay, so now that we've gone through that awesome game, thank you, ladies, for sharing that. That was really fun. Let's talk a little bit more about the growth design, about a career in growth design. Now, do you believe that anybody could just study and become a growth designer? Lex, we'll ask you. Or can anybody study to become a growth designer? Or do they need some kind of foundational background? What do you think what should they study to become a growth designer?
So I believe that you need a solid foundation in design to practice growth. I think that we've been seeing a decent amount of interest from design students, people that are learning design who want to get into growth, which I think is really cool. But I think it's drinking from the fire hose to learn both design and growth at the same time. They're both really complex, and I think it's too much to learn at once. So I would recommend, I think Molly would recommend too, having a solid design practice before you dive into growth.
And what does a solid design practice look like, Molly? Sorry to cut you off. I didn't
That
realize
was for
that
me, Lex.
Yeah.
I mean, growth design is a specialty, right? So like, generally you get some sort of your design process. I think it was like more of like a mid-career thing. I do growth design internships, but I only take master's students because a master's student tends to have like a good process foundation and kind of won't, and also tends to, by the time they're investing that much, have good aesthetic judgment, have validated market through a job or two that they can, work in sort of a high complexity environment. So I always see it more as like a specialty, and you don't necessarily go straight to a specialty. You kind of need a little bit of a general foundation in design skills. So whether that's product or UX or UI, but be able to, like, I would say the bread and butter, like core product feature design, like have that sort of UX lifecycle, some experience with engineering and engineering collaboration, those types of things. You want to be figuring all of that out while you're also figuring out how to drive business impact. I think it is kind of a tall ask.
Definitely. And we have quite a few people here. Let's open it up for audience questions. I am here. I'm actually here.
Just like early career is so hard to break into design anyway. And there are so few growth design roles that you would be going for like the hardest specialty right out the gate. But I think if you want to practice growth design, you don't need a growth design job title. You can, no matter what even if your job title is like graphic design, which is actually where you see a lot of opportunity for early career people, is sort of more traditional design disciplines. Even if you're like a graphic designer on sort of like a communications team, you can start practicing growth design kind of, without, not saying disregard your roles, responsibilities, but something that you can kind of start doing and have the job title catch up to you. And work with your own company to change a job title or a job description later once you're practicing something, and like telling them what you want to be called, as opposed to going out there and trying to find like the growth design job that's tailor-made for you to practice within, especially if you're early career.
I actually agree. I think that the graphic and marketing communications designers actually have a great opportunity to, whether or not you call yourself a growth designer, it's like you have a really big opportunity to make a huge impact on the business by like branding and communications. So it's like
a backdoor into the product too.
Yeah,
like suddenly you're designing a landing page, and then suddenly you're designing the modals inside of the app. And so it's also a backdoor for a lot of people who are struggling to get into product UX or UI design. going through like the communications or marketing design route can be, and focusing on growth design can be a backdoor into the product if that's where you really want to be. Because it tends to pay better, it tends to have more job stability, less contractor driven, if that's your goal, right? Like, you know, all the love to the permalance community out there, but if your job is like if your goal is a full-time job, so sometimes practicing growth designer as a communications designer or a marketing designer can be like a backdoor into a product team.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're going to open up for questions. Audience, questions, please give us all your questions, the hardest ones you have.
I saw some earlier that we didn't answer.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's true. And I got to scroll up because we had so much fun here. Okay.
Everybody had really good instincts about the test.
Okay. Jean asked, can growth, here, we can actually show this on the screen. Can growth be a shared responsibility across all product teams?
Controversial. I vote no, but there are a lot of people that think yes.
What growth mindset could you tweak the question to say yes? So we can all have no. She's hardliner. Okay?
I think no. I think that this is a really good way to not drive growth at your company. And this question comes up a lot. I think that people are like, oh, well, I mean, on one hand, product designers will be like, well, isn't growth design just product design? And it's like, no, it's not. There's a couple of reasons I think this. One is that growth problems are really hard. If your company has a legitimate growth problem, they're hard, they're complex, and you need to focus on cracking them and unpacking the mystery of why retention is not as high as you want it, or activation is not as high as you want it, or you don't have that viral loop that Molly was talking about. And if everyone's just kind of like chugging along doing their jobs, like you're just not going to crack that open. You're going to do the linear, you know, slow dive to death, honestly. When I worked at Envision, I saw them kill their growth design team or their growth team. And we all know how well Envision's doing now.
Not to name names.
Not to name names, exactly.
Okay. And this is a really, really good question from Radonna. Sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly, but you're very welcome to be here and I'm happy to have you. What if we don't have data to show when applying for a growth designer job position? What can we do?
Data to show, meaning like a track record?
Metrics.
Metrics. Yeah, I mean, I think that I do look at a track record, especially for a growth. I look at a track record for a product designer. So like, you know, if I look at it in a resume, like I want to see, you know, what you were aiming for and did you achieve it? Like how was your design successful and by what criteria? So not even with growth design, but with product design, I would expect to see, like I manage teams, product design, growth design, UX engineering. I expect a track record. The objectives that those three different specialties are aiming for are very different, but I expect to see a track record for every design specialty that I'm hiring for. So I can't just see a design and know that it's successful. I need you to tell me why it was successful with the product metrics that it drove.
And Lex, you mentioned that, you mentioned something the other day about.
I was going to say some of our fellow growth design community, and Radonna and Jean are both in the growth design community. Thank you for being a part of that. Ran Lou did a Clubhouse talk on this, and I can't remember if it was Ran or Chase or Alan Jordan who said, you know, pulling customer quotes can be good, pulling reviews of your product. So like as Molly said, sort of thinking about what is the impact that you had, even if you don't have a quantitative metric. Did you get 5 stars in the App Store or something like that? That could be a great thing to show too.
Yeah, I think Jean said, how do you crack position without a growth design experience? Like nobody has growth design experience. Like it's too new. I mean, arguably maybe 3 years old. How old do you think growth design is? So I don't know.
But I don't think
I mean, it's I think it's like breaking out this year, Molly. You said this is the year of growth design. I agree.
It's because of you guys, you ladies,
and you, Andy, and you.
We're all here to create more of what is helping, you know, improve the product and making it more valuable and attracting like the right users to the product, not necessarily like just making a product grow, but you want it to grow with the right people. So,
I
okay,
think
we
we're
have
also
some.
riding the coattails of product-led growth, to be honest, too. I think product-led growth got really big sort of late last year, going into this year. I think we're also riding the fact that, like, traditional channels for growth don't work kind of nowadays in sort of the North American kind of business context. So people are looking for reinvention and
Well, what about like like SEO growth? It's like, remember where you would just copy and paste something over and over again and just have it be in the background just so somebody can click on your page, and now it's more about quality
trauma.
content. Yeah. So
Not just
this
stuffing
question might
keywords.
be controversial, but I don't know. Peter Merholt said UX design blew up because product management wasn't doing the job. Is growth design the same? Are we creating this practice for designers because it's easier than retaining PMs? Interesting question.
There are growth PMs too. I think that's really important
Yeah.
to point out. There are growth PMs and there are growth engineers. So generally, we see growth designers joining teams with a cross-functional growth team, not just a growth designer by themselves.
Yeah, I
So
think product management has sort of been the growth party for a long time. Like, I think a lot marketing and product management, I think, have actually sort of been at the helm of growth before design, just in sort of the popular imagination. And in some ways, design is catching up and carving out its own space as it does. But yeah, I think product management is the most thankless job in all of tech. And they're like never doing a good job, according to everybody. So actually, the two last designers I hired were all transferring from PM roles. Like, they had been designers or engineers, had gone through a PM role, and were like, I want back in design. So I just think that's like a super hard role in general. Like, product management is like a churn machine.
It's interesting because when I was at Adobe, we had a separate PM team, like growth team and most of the people on there were PMs.
Yeah.
And then we had a growth designers, which was and ended up, at first the designers were like underneath. They couldn't figure out where to put them, but they ended up separating out the teams and putting the PMs were in a separate team than the growth design team. And it's almost like I guess each company has to figure out what works best for them, but it makes sense. It's like we're all kind of following us. Everybody's designing in some ways. It's just some people are reporting metrics, and some people are measuring, and some people are negotiating with the boss to get more money to be able to do more experimentation. I think
Yeah,
it all.
like people, I think the conventional wisdom was your first growth hire should be a PM. And then people realized, but what are they PMing? There's no one to actually like build or execute. And so I think now what people are realizing is like, oh, actually I should hire people who can execute, who just with the means of production, like a designer or an engineer even, or a hybrid, like a UX engineer, and they're able to execute and start like testing the obvious stuff. Where if you hire a PM, they then have to go like find someone to do the work, which is like,
which was happening and is still happening places.
Totally. Yeah, totally. All right. So, okay, this is actually a good question. Actually, all have great questions. There are no bad questions.
Andy does not play favorites. All of your questions are wonderful.
All your questions. Are there more preferable, sustainable forms of growth than others in design? Or is everything is design, darling? Or is growth just growth regardless of the method?
This is like Lex's topic. You should.
I don't understand the question.
Yeah, Ray, can you elaborate?
Are you saying there's like bad forms of growth, like hacky forms of growth, and better, more sustainable forms of growth? Is that your question, Ray?
I think that some of this might be relevant if we're going with that. Like last month, or maybe it wasn't last month, it was like a couple months ago, but we did a talk about like privacy and respect. Yeah, like, oh look, Tyler. Hello, Tyler. What's up? Anyway, we were talking about like ethically growing a company versus like just trying to get a bunch of people on your product. I think that's
Yeah. Well, so I think this is the major opportunity in bringing design into the mix in growth. And I think that the term growth hacking is about 11 years old now. Is that right? Yeah. And growth hacking has gotten a really bad reputation because of companies like Facebook and Amazon that have physically killed human lives. So I think that the reason to bring designers, not to bring the mood down, but I think to bring designers in who really have a voice and can play at a strategic level and aren't just like waiting to make mocks is the power of growth design. It's someone who can really say, no, this is a bad way to go about this. What about if we did this other thing instead? We could still hit that goal.
Yeah, I mean, we like ultimately like a product that has value will grow. And so even with growth design, you're helping people get to that value, but you're not, there's not a bankruptcy of value in there. And so I think that, with dark patterns or being overly focused on acquisition are characteristics of growth hacking, right? Like, take this quiz, but I won't give you the results until you give me your email address. Like people figure that out pretty quick. There's, users are smart. They'll figure that stuff out, that it has, that it's a waste of their time pretty quickly. They'll burn out on those. And I think growth designers, we tend to focus a lot more, especially this year with sort of recession conditions. We've been focusing a lot more on retention. And especially in the B2B space, like retention is way more powerful than acquisition, right? Because that's how you really build a valuable user base, is by holding on to like recurring subscriptions and, paying down that lifetime value on a customer. And so, as a designer, we focus so much more on, in the B2B space anyway, I don't know as much in B2C, but in the B2B space, we focus, almost all of our experiments are around engagement, retention, reactivation, activation, upgrade experiences, time to value, time to aha moments, first mile. Like those are the things we focus on. We don't focus on like email acquisition. We don't focus on product sign up. Most of what we do is really around retention and engagement.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Also, like one other thing that I would like to add on top of that is like Elena Lynn. She works as a growth designer over at LinkedIn, and she mentioned one time that she was actually working with the engineer, and she was making some design decisions, and the engineer said to her, "I think that's going to cause a lot of people to drop off." And she says, "Yeah, that's what we want. We want the wrong people to drop off because they're not part of this group." Like in the specific, like remove connections or remove the people that are not part of that particular segment, so you can actually grow it and focus in on the audience. So like I thought that was really interesting.
It reminds me of my
Yeah.
friend Cameron, who told me I needed to approach my dating life like a funnel of qualified leads and qualifying the leads at every stage of the funnel.
You should totally do that. Or just go have fun and it will all happen naturally. But that's another conversation. Okay, let's continue. David Brown. Retention before
This is a great
acquisition.
question.
Okay. You mentioned you'd only hire a growth design intern if they had a master's in design or maybe had experience, right? Wouldn't that be a form of gatekeeping for your or to your students out?
And then like, what about boot camps, which is a big feeder into the design industry? Yeah, I think so. For an internship in general, like you're looking at a student population. That's usually like a constraint or a restraint. Just like side notes, to always pay your interns, of course, right? So if you're saying it's a student internship where you have to be a student to participate in the internship, then if I was saying with growth design, I would say like, look, I don't think an undergrad designer, I don't think they're qualified, because an undergrad design program tends to not, you would not have practiced it. And so you would not have experience like working with teams, or your design process is completely theoretical. And also I don't see very many undergrad programs like teaching up-to-date design processes as like a reality, unfortunately, too. But I think the bigger question here is like, well, how do boot camps figure into entry-level roles? And I think that's what I see a lot of like springboard, thinkful candidates. And I think it's just really hard for them to compete, because they compete with each other too. They compete with their cohorts. They compete against, BAs, masters, people with work experience. So, I mean, I think it just goes back to like what the numbers are. Like it is just super hard to break into design at all. But I think if you have an internship program that is specifically looking at students, then that's just the whole like master's thing is like, that's just to me kind of like the minimum bar. But I have interviewed bootcamp folks in my master's internship, and I've taken them to like the top 3 candidates. One of them has been a bootcamp. So as long as you're kind of being flexible on that, I think it's fine. But yeah, I mean, it's really early career. Breaking into design it is really challenging for sure.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, the internship thing is hard because you have the student constraint, but for general jobs, I don't think you have to have even gone to college, but I do think you don't want to be like figuring out how Figma works and how to make a mock-up or how to do a user interview while you're trying to solve growth problems. It's too hard. So you do want to chase a more traditional UI or product or marketing design job first. But I do think Molly talks a lot about the privilege that's happening in the growth field. I do think that there's a lot of gatekeeping in growth, and that is something that we are really keen on destroying.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, growth in general tends to be like very much, it leans towards people who are confident enough to like fail visibly and fail often, which we all know is going to align with people who are afforded more intellectual property at work, intellectual security at work, right? By being in an in-group or being part of a dominant culture. So growth in general has traditionally been like super male dominated and super dominated by product managers. And so I think it's around, building creative confidence and places where people feel secure to like fail visibly, which I think can be a challenge for designers. I mean, a lot of designers burn out on growth too, because they get tired of the failure, or, they can feel like sometimes the spirit is taken out of the craft by being so like numerically driven. So that's definitely a reality as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Julius. So what 3 characteristics make a great growth designer? I don't know what 3 make a great portfolio. That's too many questions, but maybe we can, between the 2 of you, we can find an answer in there. Lex Luthor. No, I'm just kidding.
I think a real ability to talk to customers and do so authentically and not just in a user testing capacity, which I think is super boring. Like a real user research practice that's really focused on human behavior is a really great characteristic. The leaning heavy on qual, I think, is key.
Qualitative.
Yeah, sorry, qual. My old boss used to call it qual. I think leaning into that is really important, and not just like in the pretend way that I think most product designers do, which is like, I talked to 5 users, they liked my UI. It's not like that. It's like a real practice of understanding human behavior. I think second would be an interest in data. I said to you, Andy, that I don't think you don't have to be like obsessed with data to be good at growth design, but I do think you need to be interested in that. And then the last thing would be you need to be interested in sustainable businesses. Like you need to want to help your business succeed, which honestly, I know a lot of designers that don't want to do that, which is okay, but they shouldn't work in growth.
Why are they working for the company if they don't?
A lot of designers like pixels, right? They like motion graphics, or they're just like, oh, like Molly said, the craft, right? Like
the art
or the perks. I know a lot of unhappy Airbnb designers because it's just such a sweet. They get fresh juice.
So much talking on this. I'm like, I feel bad.
So much trash talking? Is that what you said?
I'm like, oh, well, I
have
very real,
no
bias.
I get it. Capitalism is horrible, but you have to want to care about that to do this job.
Yeah, or I mean, you can't. Honestly, where I really cut my teeth in growth design was in the social sector. I mean, some of the most creative work in growth happens in nonprofit social sector because it's sort of the stakes are huge, the resources are small, so the practitioners get crafty. And yeah, I think the most famous examples of growth design or just growth in general come from like, for better, or I would argue for worse, come from Silicon Valley, like the Pinterest and the Dropbox, really the most famous practitioners. But actually the really innovative work is happening outside of Silicon Valley. It's just those people don't have the time to talk about it, or they don't have the endless amounts of capital that big tech has to fail so large and succeed so large as well. So yeah, I think especially in politics, in around donation or supporter mobilization, that's growth. Like supporter mobilization is growth work, and it's some of the most meaningful growth work out there. And it's
Civic
being done really
engagement.
creative.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you have to be willing to think
Yeah.
about that holistically and not just like, oh, I made this pretty thing and I'm obsessed with it because it's really beautiful.
Well, and it has to work. If it's beautiful, it has to actually like be effective, and like you can't just make something beautiful. You have to give like people a reason. There has to be substance behind it.
There's like art and there's scientists, and
Yep.
some designers are more artists and some designers are more scientists. And so I think a growth designer is more on the scientist end of the spectrum. And we love our art directors and our artists, strive to be them in some aspects of our work. But I don't think they would be happy like grinding on, donor pages, to be honest. But
Well, if
matters
they can
to
find
them.
a creative way to make it really fun and engaging, that's the beauty of like really great design, is like finding the balance between making it beautiful and also effective,
Yeah, I mean, the
But
visual communication stuff is like way underestimated in almost all sort of startups. Like how much you can achieve through like visual design tweaks alone is crazy.
and you showed it on the A/B tests with like some of the things. Okay. And we have time for like maybe one or two more questions. I know I said two more questions a while ago, but I'm really enjoying your answers. So, okay. Ray asks, has there been something in your growth experience that totally surprised you? Like, why did that convert so well? I'm trying to think of something.
I have a big failure. I mean, it's rare that something converts better than I thought it would.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
I have a huge failure. I have a test when I was at the Black Tux, which is an e-commerce company that does like suits and tuxedos for people going to weddings or special events. Our checkout process wouldn't show you what you were buying or renting. It would just like take your money and be like, it's a surprise, which I thought was ridiculous. So I ran a test to show what's in the cart before you buy, and it failed horribly. Like minutes after, like hours after launching it, I had to turn it off because it was losing me so much money. And that was very depressing. But we did a lot of work after that to figure out why that failed so horribly. And it really exposed some other things in the UX. So it was a good learning.
It's not always like, that's the thing about growth design and like life in general, is that it's the beauty of failing, is that it's not necessarily failing. It's like you're learning, but when you're costing if you're able to turn it off and like stop like losing money on a certain thing, that's important as well. But I feel like it's like people have to shift their mindset from like I'm gonna fail versus I'm gonna actually learn something, and like try to make the risk as small as possible so they can learn as much as possible with like less risk. But okay, I know I said I wasn't gonna contribute, but I lied. Here we go.
Molly, do you have one?
Okay.
You have
Yeah, Molly.
surprise?
Yeah.
I mean, my experience, it's you fail, you win. And the things that win, in terms of like memorable examples, have been around. I'm trying to think of stuff that I feel like were really big breakthroughs. A lot of them have been around pricing and when to talk about pricing. That's been a huge one. Like when do people when to do like price calculation or price estimation. So I've actually taken almost all pricing and price estimation out and realized that a lot of people are just doing that subconsciously and they don't want to do the work to do it like in front of them. So I've removed a lot of price calculation, price estimation from apps, and seen higher kind of upgrade and conversion from that. Again, I don't know if that's going to work for everyone, but it's not that pricing isn't important. It's just that people are doing it like, so they're kind of doing it in their head and they don't want to, if they actually see it, it kind of slows them down. So I think that's an example I was thinking that was like really counterintuitive, because I think you'd expect people to be like, first I do a calculator, I see how much it's going to cost, then I give them my credit card. But I've found that people know how much it costs without me spelling it out for them a lot of the time. And so how can you make, removing pricing has actually been sort of more of the direction that I'm going, which I think is really counterintuitive to like a lot of the traditional stuff in growth is like show the 3 plans with like the check mark and the price at the bottom. And it's like, focusing a lot more on like what they'll get, like unlimited whatever or premium whatever, and less on the price has actually been effective for me in like a B2B data-driven app with specialists who are used to like understanding the cost of moving data around. So I think it depends on where you practice, but that's been a surprising, consistent theme that I've seen in our work.
It's really cool. Okay, so I think actually that's all the time that we have right now for the questions. We will next week. So first of all, let's say thank you so much, everybody. Let's give emoticons. Let's give claps. Thank you to Lex and Molly for your brilliant answers and dedicating your time to answering everybody's questions, as well as sharing that awesome, fun game with UX A/B testing. Thank you so much. This is really fun. Next week, we'll have Andy Welfel, who is the content, he's the manager of content strategy at Adobe and also the author of Writing is Designing. He'll be here at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday. And we'll talk about how content plays such a big role in user interface design, user experience design, how it impacts your, basically how to get a career as a content strategist. And Andy manages a big team of writers who are also / designers, because writing is designing. And he'll be there to answer your questions. But first he'll give a presentation, and then he'll be doing a Q&A. You can tune in at youtube.com/design career network. And any questions that you might have, you can email me, andy@designcareer.org. Lex and Molly, they have a new fellowship program at growthdesigners.co. I'm going to write it right here and also post it in the show notes. Right?
Yeah,
there.
that's
okay.
Right.
And any other information that they might want to include, they'll let me know, and we'll also include it as well. Do you ladies have anything else to add before we sign off?
Yeah, just test small, bet big, and be nice to your friends.
I love it. Test small.
Definitely be nice to your friends. I was just going to mention, if you haven't gotten Molly's book, definitely check out Molly's book, Design Driven Growth. I think Andy, you mentioned that at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's linked on our site too.
That is how I found out about you, Molly, because Design Driven Growth. It's on
with
Amazon.
dashes.
Is that? Oh yeah.
Yeah, Design Driven. People like the audiobook. It's like I think it's like an hour and a half. People like the audiobook. So if you're walking around or listen while you work, I listen to a lot of podcasts while I work. I don't know if other people do. That's what a lot of people do. Thank you guys for the shout out. Just appreciate the support.
Excellent book. Thank you so much. Thanks, ladies. Have a great night, and
thank
you all for participating. This is Andy, Lex, and Molly signing off. Peace. Bye.